Gaza is a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call, and it is still a wake-up call for all systems, all the Western world, to understand that their systems are being run to serve the interests of a tiny minority. Before 7th of October, nobody would think from the Muslim community to establish anything related to voting and how to vote and other things. Like, we were all, like the majority of the Muslim community, 70% of the Muslim community voted Labour, used to vote Labour before 7th of October. So we were taken for granted by the Labour Party. The Labour Party, when they failed us, when they failed our community, when it came to the genocide in Gaza, when it came to the war crimes, when it came to their poor response, unquestionable support to the genocide, to the Israeli acts in Palestine, in Gaza, then in fact their behaviors, their acts, their actions created the Muslim Votes Matter.
A lot of discussion has been had regarding the choice of the name, Muslim Votes Matter. It could be perceived as a Muslim party or Muslims trying to influence politics.
From the first perspective is that we are not a political party. We educate our community, we do research, we educate our community about their constitutional rights in terms of how to vote. Educate them how to vote according to what is relevant to our values. Now, are our values as Muslims different from Australian values? I mean, an average Australian person.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to yet another podcast of TBN. Today we are pleased to welcome Dr Naser Al Ziyadat, an academic, researcher, a columnist, a strategist, and a member, or spokesperson I should say, of the Muslim Votes Matter National Board and WA State Lead. Dr Naser, thank you for joining us. Can you start by introducing yourself to our viewers? Maybe tell us where you grew up, where you studied, and about your professional career so far.
I grew up in the Middle East. Though I'm from Jordan, but I lived my life in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. I studied in England. I've got my PhD from Durham University in England, and I migrated to Australia. I visited more than 40 cities all over the world. So I would call myself, I'm the citizen of the world in general. So that's my best introduction for myself, I would say. For myself as here in WA, I just consider myself as a community servant for the Muslim community and for the wider Australian community.
I believe your mother is from Palestine. You're from Jordan, but your mother is originally from Palestine. How have you all been coping with the ongoing genocide that's taking place right now?
Well, in fact, I am the grandchild of a couple who survived the Nakba. So we would call them survivors of the Nakba, and that's the best terminology to use rather than refugees, because I don't think that they were refugees. They were survivors of the Nakba in 1948. They moved to Jordan, and they got my mother was born in Jordan, and where she met my father, and they married. So being a Jordanian with that link, by the way, there is no big difference between Jordanians and Palestinians. Even by tribal, by blood, they are relatives. It's just the line that was drawn by Sykes and Picot, the colonization, British and French colonization, when they divided the land, they divided it and they considered that to be two different states. But I assure you that there is no big difference between those who call themselves Jordanians and Palestinians. But this means that when you live in Jordan or when you live in Palestine, this means that you are born from the womb of politics. You are born in conflict. You are born and experience that kind of struggle and suffering every day. You expect something new to happen. You expect something that is not expected, that is not in your agenda. So I lived all my life with Palestine being occupied by the Israeli. I lived all my life as a person who is the grandchild of the survivors of the Nakba, who lost their land, who were expelled, whom their wealth was stolen, whom their land was expropriated by the Israeli occupation with the help of the British colonization that divided our ummah altogether. So This would mean to me that I would say we are deep in it, even without being educated in politics. Not necessarily being educated in politics. We are politicians by experience, by lifestyle.
Okay, so that explains your involvement with Muslim Votes Matter. So is Muslim Votes Matter affiliated with or endorsing any specific political party in the coming election?
Something about Muslim Votes Matter and why Muslim Votes Matter existed. In fact, before 7th of October, nobody would think from the Muslim community to establish anything related to voting and how to vote and other things. Like, we were all, like the majority of the Muslim community, according to surveys run by the Muslim Votes Matter, 70% of the Muslim community voted Labour, used to vote Labour before 7th of October. Now, so we were taken for granted by the Labour Party, and we always voted Labour, and we would never think that we would vote something else. Myself was a Labour Party member at a certain stage of my life. Now, the thing about it is that the necessity, the Labour Party, when they failed us, when they failed our community, when it came to the genocide in Gaza, when it came into the war crimes, when it came to their poor response, biased response, unquestionable support to the genocide, to the Israeli acts in Palestine, in Gaza, then in fact, their behaviors, their acts, their actions created the Muslim Votes Matter. They created the Muslim Votes Matter. It was a reaction to what they did to us, to their failure. That's how we created Muslim Votes Matter. It came to, as a group of people, each one of them would live in a different state, but they were having the same thing, same mentality, same focus, same strategy, is that we can do something, that we can practice our rights under the Australian Constitution, as we have a representative government. So we have something called freedom of political communication. And this is a constitutional entitlement. So we are all entitled to that. We will use this and vote as a bloc to communicate the messages, to bargain, to communicate the messages that we want our representatives to care about when they get our votes, so that they get our votes, by the way.
Yes. Okay, so a lot of discussion has been had regarding the choice of the name, Muslim Votes Matter. It could be perceived as a Muslim party or Muslims trying to influence politics. What do you say to that?
We can answer this from different perspectives. From the first perspective is that we are not a political party. This is something. We do not run candidates. We educate our community. We do research. We educate our community about their constitutional rights in terms of how to vote. We may endorse candidates when it comes to the election, but we may say to our community how to vote, educate them how to vote according to what is relevant to our values. Now, this will lead us to something important. Are our values as Muslims different from Australian values? I mean, an average Australian person, non-Muslim Australian person. When we say that there is a corruption and we need to fight corruption within the government and the parliament, is this something common? When we say that, for example, the majority of Australians, they believe that the system, like 54%, according to a study conducted by the Australian National University, ANU, in 2022, 54% of those who were surveyed, or respondents, which is a representative sample, I assume that it represents the Australian larger community. Those people, 54% of those people, they believe that the government is there to cater for the interests of a tiny minority of the Australian people. And 70% of those who were surveyed, they believed that the government there is to cater for their own interests. Do we want to be, are we Muslims, do we want to be within those 70%? Are we sectarians when we want to belong to those 70%? Are we sectarians when we want to belong to those 54%? I don't think so. The only thing about it is Gaza thing. Now, when we say that Australia should respect the international law, are we breaching the Australian values? Are we going contrary to the Australian values when we say that Australia should uphold the international law and sanction Israel for their war crimes and genocide in Gaza? Is this something that Australians and average Australians would not consider to be against their values? This is how we should look at it. Now, there's another thing about it. The word Muslim votes matter. I assure you that in WA we have non-Muslim volunteers for Muslim votes matter. Now, there is another thing. Muslim votes matter, as I say, we don't run candidates. So what if we support, for example, what if we endorse non-Muslim candidates? Are we going to be still sectarians? And this is very important. Now, there is another thing about it. Mobilizing a minority is not an easy task. So if we say that we want to say that all votes matter, it's going to be you are mobilizing the whole Australian community. And this is something not easy to do. So we start with this thing, with a minority, with a portion of the Australian community, wider Australian community. We start mobilizing them. And then if we grow up, why not? We can make it all Australians votes matter. So that's how we should look at it.
Some from our community would say that we are justified in saying Muslim votes matter because it's the politicians that have weaponized this word, Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorism, Islamic extremism. They are the ones that have been using this language, and we've just been used as a scapegoat, as a punching bag for so many decades. So some would argue that they are the ones that made us use because they weaponized this word Muslim. What do you say to that?
I think that we don't want to be into that area of argument or debate. I think we are Muslims in Australia, we are Australian Muslims, we are in a very diversified society in general. In Perth alone, you have more than 180 languages spoken alone. So when we say that we are Australian Muslims and Muslim votes matter, this doesn't mean that we are against Australia. There is another thing. We have the Jewish lobby in Melbourne. So nobody would say, well, why there's a Jewish lobby in Melbourne? Why they call it the Jewish lobby of Melbourne? And there is, for example, the Australian Christian Party. Nobody would criticize that there is an Australian Christian Party. Another thing about it, Angela Merkel, she ruled Germany for decades, or probably 1.5 decades, and she belonged, and her party was the Christian Democrats. And nobody criticized saying that, oh, you're making a mix of religion and politics. So we have the right to do so as Australians under the Australian Constitution and the Australian law.
Okay, now speaking about our Muslim internal differences, there are some amongst us that would say that endorsing or being involved in the political process is haram, or voting, or democracy. They say this is all un-Islamic. What do you respond? How would you respond?
The way to answer this is the following. We do not say, even the godfathers or the promoters of democracy, they don't think that democracy is an optimal system for ruling. So we all know that it has its faults. One of the faults of democracy is that it can empower a group of people to influence the whole system and achieve what they want to achieve. Achieve their interests at the expense of the majority's expense. And this is happening, this is proved to be happening. I don't say that we are in an optimal case, but I say something for our brothers and sisters who believe that we should not be engaging. And because if we engage that, we support this system that may go against our values. I'll tell them something. The day you landed in Australia, you have become a part of the system. The day you pay your taxes, you are part of that system. The day you work, you fuel. When you fuel your car, you are a part of that system. Whenever you do anything in Australia, you are a part of this system. When you have your driver's license, you are a part of this system. So this doesn't mean that voting is just the only thing about it. The day you have your citizenship as an Australian citizen, you are an integral part of this system. So how come we just look at a very narrow view saying that voting is not accepted or engaging in politics is not accepted, while the whole system is about engaging? By the way, there's another thing. What if those brothers and sisters who don't believe in voting and engaging with politics, they have a problem with the mosque and they need to get a land, for example? Are they going to be engaging with politicians or not? At all levels, for example. That's just an example about it.
So as you mentioned, Historically, majority of our Muslim community have always voted for Labour Party instead of the Conservative Liberal Party. And this is due mainly to the attitude of the Liberal Party towards the Muslim community. Even when it comes to the issue of Gaza, the Liberal Party is viewed as even being more pro-Israel than Labour. Now, how do you respond to the fears that many have that not voting for Labour will lead to the Liberal Party coming into power and therefore making the situation worse for Muslims and Gaza?
Well, we can answer this question from different angles. The first one is that it's not that if the Labour Party loses, then the Liberal Party comes in, because this two-party system is being challenged by the Australian people, not only Muslims. Now look at the last election, 2022. How many independents we had? And how many Greens they jumped and got new seats in the parliament. So this means that the system itself as a two-party system is being challenged. Now, when we say that Liberal Party can come to power, I tell you something, Liberal Party in Australia, in Western Australia, which is one of the Liberal Party's big bases as a conservative state, they're still looking for candidates to represent them. How come a party that we fear to be in power is still not yet finding candidates to represent them? How come that we fear of a party that does not appeal to the larger conservative community in Western Australia to have candidates to put their hands up so that that party can represent them or they represent that party? We should not be afraid of the Liberal Party. We should be afraid of us being unheard. We should be afraid of us being marginalized, not using our power, our collective power in voting as a bloc.
What has been the response and the attitude of the Muslim community so far towards Muslim Votes Matter?
Well, I would say that we are well received, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Muslim Votes Matter is in all states except the Northern Territory. So we are in Sydney, New South Wales, we are in Melbourne, in Victoria, in WA, in Brisbane, and in South Australia. So we've got hundreds of people on the ground, hundreds of volunteers on the ground in each state, not only in one state. We've got on our board very highly educated people. We've got lawyers, we've got scholars, statisticians, analysts, and we've got teams and sub-teams doing. We have a political strategy team. We have a research team. We have education team. They are all up to the point, very professional people. When we presented ourselves, when we launched ourselves, Muslim Votes Matter was launched on the 1st of September this year in Melbourne. We were covered by almost all media outlets, our launch event. This would tell you something, that this media would not cover a launch of a movement at that scale unless that movement had that influence on the ground. And this will tell you something about how the Muslim community would receive us. Here in WA, as I said, it's not just only the Muslim community. We have hundreds of people and we have volunteers who are non-Muslims. I've been speaking to many people all around Australia because I traveled, because I am a member of the board, national board of Muslim Votes Matter. And I tell you something, whenever we speak to people from the Muslim community, I see respect, I see trust, because they know that those people, they know what they're doing. And inshallah, we will not let them down.
Okay, now, as already mentioned, that despite being called Muslim Votes Matter, the organisation is seeking support from the wider Australian community as well. So why do you feel this is important, and has your organisation succeeded in bringing non-Muslims on board?
Yeah, we have non-Muslim volunteers in WA. That's already, it's confirmed. We have, and very highly educated people as well. They wanted to come, they wanted to volunteer, they wanted to do something. You know what? Because our narrative, our rhetoric, our strategy is so inclusive. We are not an exclusive club. And that's why they trust us and they come to us. They want to do something with us. And I can tell you something, I've never seen the media chasing a movement on the ground the way they chase us. They want to do something with us because they look at us as people with a balanced narrative, with a balanced strategy, people who know their rights under the Constitution, people who know how to do this in a very educated, sophisticated, and good way so that we can achieve what we want, inshallah.
So, going back to the two-party system, this has been a general criticism across the Western world even during the election cycles, especially since October the 7th. Can you tell us about the two-party system in Australia and why you're critical of it? You've already mentioned a bit, if you want to add more.
Well, look, the aim of democracy is representation. So the thing is that, are those two parties, or do those two parties represent all Australians? Because it's a two-party system, this means that they should represent all Australians. Why with Australians, there are 23 million or plus. Why all Australians, those 23 million, should be represented only by two parties? I think that it has become a kind of dictatorship, a one-party system, because it appears that they have almost the same thing when they agree on many, many things that serve their interests. I think that this two-party system, also from a democratic, I would say, pluralistic democratic point of view, it is not representative. The concept of representation or representative government is that a person who is in a specific electorate should represent his constituents or her constituents. When we say that a party, look for example what happened to Fatima Payman, for example, Senator Fatima Payman. When she decided to represent her constituents in the right way, the party did not allow her. So when we say that, we're talking about a two-party system that does not allow you to be really, truly represented in a country that its constitution says that it is a representative government. It has a representative government.
I've also heard you criticize the media's role in politics and in maintaining the two-party system. Could you elaborate on this and tell us what can be done to counteract their agendas?
Look, always says that, tell me who funds you, I'll tell you who you are. So if you go to the media and have a look at deep research, that's something that I did by research, as a professional researcher. Look at the links. Who finance or who funds the media outlet? Any media outlet. I don't want to mention any name, but look at it. If you see the who funds it or who owns it, then you know the agenda. Immediately you know the agenda. Now, if I tell you that in Australia we have about 90% of the Australian media is controlled by one entity, one corporation, or owned by one person, would this be triggering something in your rings the bell that we don't have an independent media, truly independent media in Australia? We don't have it.
Agreed. The US recently had their elections, in which Donald Trump won a surprising victory, or maybe not so surprising for some. What lessons do you think we in Australia can take from the US elections?
Well, we need to look at Donald Trump as a person outside of the system. So Donald Trump is not a Republican. Although he's using the Republicans' platform, that's fine, but he's not a Republican. Donald Trump is not a Democratic. Now again, Donald Trump's winning means that the two-party system is falling. The two-party system is being collapsing all over the world. What I say to Australia here, hey, if you want to avoid a Trumpism movement in Australia, you should fix this two-party system. This is how we should look at it. If you want to avoid a Trump-like person in Australia, you should always fight corruption, appeal to the people, represent the people, and always stay away from the interests of corporations who dominate in a way or another the Australian domestic and international politics.
How do you respond to those who say that Gaza is a foreign issue and Australians should focus on our own domestic issues, like the housing crisis, the rising cost of living, etc.?
Well, it depends upon who says this. If this is said by a Muslim member of a Muslim community, I wouldn't accept it. Look, I'm not going to respond to that person. If this is said by Australian people, let's talk about it now. But if it is said by non-Muslim Australians, well, standing with Gaza means standing with justice. And if we think that we pride ourselves as an advanced first world class country in terms of supporting human rights, in terms of upholding international law, in terms of upholding universal good values, we should always put pressure on our government to support Gaza. Because a government that does not uphold international law when it comes to Gaza and the genocide, this government and this system is not going to uphold domestic and national laws when it comes to fighting corruption, for example. This is linked to this. Gaza is a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call, and it is still a wake-up call for all systems, all the Western world, to understand that their systems are being run by a tiny minority to serve the interests of a tiny minority, to serve the interests of a tiny minority.
Recently, the ICC issued arrest warrants for the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, and the Hamas commander, Mohammed Daif. Now, Australia is a member of the ICC. How would you characterize Australia's response so far to these arrest warrants?
I would say it's vague. It's not a clear shot saying that Australia will uphold the rules of the ICC, but they did not mention names, for example. Names are very clear in the arrest warrants. Suppose that now there is an arrest warrant, or there is an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, for example, as a war crime criminal or whatever it is. Would Penny Wong go and say it in a shy way, saying that, we will uphold the rules of the ICC? Or they would say, if Putin lands in Australia, we will arrest him. We need a clear answer regarding this matter.
Yes, I agree. It seems to be a meek response. But you could also think that from this point of view, that if they were to condemn the individuals involved, then it would be actually opening the doors for their own guilt, because they have been complicit or even aiding to some extent the Israeli government?
Well, it might be the case. By the way, they are all referred, many members of the Albanese government, they have been all referred to the ICC as accessories to the genocide in Gaza. Now, it might be the case, but let's wait and see. But when they say that upholding the ICC rules, this should have been remembered a long time ago when they supported the genocide in a way or another, even by words, and by helping the military exportations or arming the army of Israel.
Do you think the ICC issuing these warrants has been a big victory for those who support Palestine?
I think definitely yes, but not for those who are supporting Palestine, for those who are supporting international law, for those who are supporting good governance at the international level. Yes. Okay, for us, as people who support Palestine, that's good, because we've got connections to it, religious connections, land connections, for myself as well. I would say this, it's a big victory. But let's look at it from a strategic perspective. Anyone who would like to live in a world that has good governance should be happy with what happened. And why we always think of ICC, for example, when it came to Yugoslavia, like 2 decades ago when they arrested one of the Yugoslavian war criminals, everybody was upholding the ICC, praising the ICC. And when it came to Gaza, we wanted to say no. And by the way, they started to have a kind of scandals or smearing campaigns against the prosecutor of the ICC. Now, this is just a silly game, and it's not going to appeal to the public in general.
The response by nations on a global scale to these arrest warrants has been mixed. Many nations of the EU have said they will carry out the arrests should any of the individuals enter their countries. However, there are those who have heavily criticized the ICC for their decision. This includes Hungary, who is a member state of the ICC, and also, of course, the US, who is not. Such actions could undermine international law. The rule of law is at a threat here of being completely not acted upon.
Well, I say yes. I can't say no about this, but you need to look at anything against the state of Israel from two perspectives. Now, Israel itself was founded by non-religious Jews, secular Jews. So it was founded as a state that would enable a colonial imperial project that serves the Western interests, mainly British interests, in the Middle East. And that's in Sir Rothschild's diaries, So this is not something that I created. That's how they created it. At the very beginning, they brought some religious Jews to Israel at the time so that they got some spices on it. So, okay, look. And they wanted to convince the Jews to move into that state, new state, saying that, oh, look, it's a home for all Jews all over the world. But over the years, the religious Jews, they have been greater in number. They grew. And now they became the majority in Israel. And that's now, it has become a religious thing. A religious thing. So you have now a colonial, capitalistic project serving the interests of the British Empire at the time and now inherited by the US, and a religious thing. Now, those who support Israel, they might be one of those two things. Either a religious person who thinks that it is a religious cause, or a capitalistic colonial project that they want to support. Now look at Norway, it can be one of those two things. But I think now at the state levels, it should always be something related to economic interests. A project in the Middle East to always guarantee the interests of the US empire these days.
Okay. It's been over a year since the genocide began in Gaza, actually over 400 days. And the war only looks to be spreading. What do you say for those who feel that their protesting, their advocacy, boycotting, all this isn't working, and that there is no point in continuing with such modes of action?
I think that all types of activism are very important. We should continue what we are doing. Protests should be there. I'll tell you something about protests. Can you imagine that when we march the streets, even if we were 20 of us, and one of those bypassers on the street just take a footage and circulated that footage to their group of just community group, what's going to happen? Protests all over the world has helped the Palestinian cause to be spread and to be supported by non-Muslims, to be supported by non-Arabs. And that's very important. So all types of activism are very important, and we should always keep the momentum up so that we have that kind of popularity to the Palestinian cause.
With the elections coming up, what advice would you give to Australians on how they should vote?
Well, two-party system should be avoided. And this two-party system can be challenged by two means. First is independence, voting for independence, wherever they are, whatever they are. Second is minor parties. So Australians, they should wake up that those two-party systems over the past decades, they have developed a system to help them alone. Look at the election rules. Look at the funding laws. It all serves them. It all gives them the priority so that they maintain that system for themselves only. I don't think that there is a big difference between Labour and Liberal when it comes to international politics. I don't think there is a big difference between Labour and Liberal in terms of combating global warming. I don't think there is a big difference between Labour and Liberal in challenging mining corporations. They will be always the same. So challenge the two-party system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naser. And thank you all to our viewers for watching another episode of TBN. Remember to like, share and subscribe to support independent news and media. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.